Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're diving straight into a critical stack of sources today, navigating everything from India's geopolitical positioning right through to the global scramble for rare earth minerals. Our first cluster of sources takes a really hard look at India's foreign policy establishment. It seems to suggest it's, well, stalled at a crucial crossroads.
Yeah, what's immediately clear from the editorial section is this pretty sharp critique. The argument is that India's foreign policy apparatus is really struggling to, update its operating system.
Upgrading system.
Metaphorically speaking, yeah. It's like it's functioning with a playbook that feels frozen in the mid-20th century. The sources specifically mention traditions from the 1930s through the 1950s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that adherence to historical non-alignment, or maybe traditions from that era, the source argues, is actually isolating India now, in this current global environment where multilateralism seems to be breaking down rapidly.
Precisely. And that trend, which the piece notes was certainly aggravated by President Donald Trump's constant shifting of goalposts, it demands extreme nimbleness, something India is reportedly failing to show right now.
So there's a lack of agility.
Exactly. And the consequence of this inertia, according to these sources, is quite striking. Despite India being, among the top 5 economic powers globally, it's increasingly viewed as an outlier. It's steadily losing its geopolitical relevance. That's the argument being made.
An outlier. Losing relevance. Those are strong claims.
Mm.
Is there concrete evidence cited for this alleged irrelevance? What are the specific examples?
Well, they do offer some specifics. Look at the new Gaza peace settlement, for instance. India was conspicuously absent from that whole process.
Really? Who drove that then?
It was largely orchestrated by the U.S., Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. India just wasn't really in the picture. And that's seen as a significant diplomatic snub, especially since Turkey, a country described as hostile towards India and a known supporter of Pakistan, played such a critical role.
And India's reaction?
Well, the source says India kind of underlined its own displacement by sending only the lowest level of representation to the grand reconciliation ceremony that followed the conflict's end. It sends a message,
It certainly does. A powerful signal of being, well, sidelined in West Asia.
Hmm.
And this strategic void you mentioned, it's apparently being filled by countries perceived as unfriendly to Indian interests.
That's the core strategic concern highlighted. It's not just Turkey gaining influence, and remember, Turkey explicitly sided with Pakistan during a recent conflict, but also India's position as an outlier in West Asia was, according to the source, sort of confirmed by this new strategic mutual defense agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan.
A defense agreement, what does that entail?
It effectively treats aggression against one as aggression against the other. That really changes the strategic calculus in the region and potentially leaves India looking isolated.
Okay, that's the global picture. What about closer to home? In the neighborhood, if India is struggling globally, how's it doing right next door?
Not much better, according to this analysis. The sources describe India as a conspicuous absentee and even a mere bystander during the recent Gen Z revolution in Nepal.
A bystander in Nepal. That seems problematic.
It does. It's highlighted as showing a critical lack of depth and, frankly, content in its neighborhood policy. For a power that sees itself as rising, failing to show proactive leadership or even, deep engagement in its immediate periphery. Well, that's framed as a major strategic failure.
And there's China. Always the elephant in the room, isn't it? The article seems to warn strongly against any attempts to kind of smooth over past tensions, like the Galwan incident.
Yes, exactly. It warns against diplomatic circles trying, since that Tianjin meeting in August 2025, to gloss over the June 2020 Galwan episode as just a mere blip.
So don't downplay it.
Definitely not. This is perhaps the strongest warning in the editorial piece. China is presented as a conundrum that is not easily cracked. The caution is crystal clear. India must be extremely vigilant in its dealings with President Xi Jinping.
And how is China expanding its influence, according to the source?
It's described as happening through devious ways, not just the big, obvious infrastructure projects anymore. It's the proliferation of small businesses, a targeted presence in universities, research centers, and, critically, cyberspace. It's more subtle, perhaps.
Which requires constant watching.
Eternal vigilance is the phrase used. That's what's needed from the Indian side, according to this perspective.
Okay, that sets a pretty intense stage. A world needing vigilance, adaptability, and crucially reliable information. But our next set of sources brings the critique much closer to home, suggesting a crisis in India's domestic governance, especially when it comes to, well, measuring reality accurately.
Yeah, we shift focus dramatically here from foreign policy inertia to what's described as a fundamental failure of governance that undermines policy itself. And that's the lack of credibility in the very data decisions are based on.
How so? What are the examples?
The most vivid illustrations given are the failures in Delhi's real-time air pollution network, and similarly, Lucknow's National Ambient Noise Monitoring Network.
Delhi's air pollution network. What's wrong there? I thought we had real-time monitoring.
We do, but the source alleges the infrastructure is essentially designed to, well, mislead. Sensors are poorly placed, sometimes under heavy tree cover, sometimes behind walls.
Not kidding. Why?
The alleged effect is that it actively skews the data downwards, to report air quality as moderate perhaps, even while citizens are literally choking on toxic smog outside.
So it's not just a technical issue, like a sensor malfunctioning.
The article argues no, this isn't a technical glitch. It's framed as a fundamental crisis of governance, maybe even political will. Because if your foundational evidence, the pollution data, is engineered to understate the problem,
Then any policies based on that data are fundamentally flawed, like rules about stubble burning or traffic restriction.
exactly, they're compromised from the outset. You simply cannot formulate effective policy if your starting point is, well, deception, as the source puts it.
What's the human cost of this real-time deception?
It's painted as quite tragic. Misleading air quality indices, the article argues, actively delay necessary interventions, maybe even judicial ones. There's a reference to the Air Quality Life Index report.
What does that say?
It provides a stark figure. If Delhi somehow managed to meet WHO standards for air quality, the average life expectancy there could rise by a staggering 8.2 years.
8 years, just from cleaner air.
That's the estimate cited. And nationally, the report suggests pollution silently erodes about 5 years of life expectancy for the average Indian citizen. It's a massive public health crisis being potentially obscured by flawed data.
And you mentioned this isn't just about air pollution. Noise pollution monitoring has similar issues.
Yes, the source points to Lucknow's National Ambient Noise Monitoring Network. It apparently failed to accurately capture the actual decibel levels in the city.
So bad data there, too.
Seems so. And furthermore, India apparently still relies on outdated noise pollution rules from the year 2000. These fall far short of current WHO guidelines.
Why does that matter so much?
Well, this institutional lethargy, as you might call it, weakens fundamental rights. Under Articles 19 and 21 of the Constitution, noise is increasingly recognized not just as an annoyance, but as a public health issue, and potentially a constitutional one, which demands rigorous, accurate measurement.
So we have these expensive sensors, Class 1 sensors the article mentions, bought with public money. But the system seems broken. Where does the accountability lie? Why is enforcement apparently so lax?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The accountability chain seems broken. The Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, has guidelines for sensor placement, yes, but the source claims enforcement is lax. Political pressures are mentioned as being endemic.
And no checks and balances.
Critically, what seems to be missing, unlike in many international systems, is any kind of independent panel or third-party audit to review these monitoring systems. Without that external scrutiny, the risk is that the data remains internally managed, potentially politically manipulated, and ultimately unreliable.
Okay, from flawed data potentially delaying action, let's move to a situation where action was taken very decisively, maybe too decisively.
We're turning now to the Supreme Court's handling of the investigation into that tragic Karur stampede in Tamil Nadu. 41 deaths, right?
That's correct. A horrific incident at a political rally. And this source examines the Supreme Court's decision to abruptly transfer the investigation to the CBI.
What was happening before the SC stepped in?
Well, there were already probes underway. One by a Special Investigation Team, or SIT, appointed by the Madras High Court, and another by a State Inquiry Commission. The SC's order effectively halted both of those ongoing investigations.
That sounds like a major intervention. What was the Supreme Court's reasoning?
The SC apparently cited two main factors described in the article as quite sweeping. First, the perceived political undertones of the case.
Political undertones, that sounds a bit vague. It does. And the second factor was a perception that top-ranking Tamil Nadu police officers had defended their subordinates in a press conference. The SC felt this created doubt about impartiality among citizens.
Okay, but how does that square with the usual legal principles around ordering a CBI probe? Doesn't the SC usually exercise restraint?
That's exactly the conflict highlighted in the source. The Supreme Court's own precedents, its past judgments, stress that directing a CBI probe should be the measure of last resort. It's supposed to be used sparingly, cautiously, and only in exceptional situations.
And not just because someone feels unsure.
Right. The court has historically cautioned against transferring investigations merely because a party involved harbors a subjective lack of confidence in the state police. You generally need more than just feelings.
So it sounds like the argument is the SC kind of bypassed its own standards here, relying on inferences rather than hard evidence of failure by the existing probes.
That's the crux of the critique presented. The article states, the SC order failed to cite even a single specific instance of bias or malified action, or even undue delay by the existing SIT or the Inquiry Commission.
But previous judgments require actual proof, right?
Yes, they typically require sufficient material beyond just the allegations in the petitions to justify such a drastic step as a CBI transfer. So this decision raises questions about relying on vague notions like political undertones or interpreting press conferences.
And it also touches on center-state relations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It raises serious questions about incursions into state authority, especially given that police and public order are state subjects under the Constitution. And adding another layer, Tamil Nadu had already withdrawn its general consent for CBI investigations within the state back in 2023.
Okay, let's stick with governance issues, but shift to the mechanics of democracy itself, India's massive electoral system. The Election Commission recently revised something called the Special Intensive Revision, or SIR, of electoral rolls. This hadn't happened for 2 decades.
That's right. After 2 decades, it began with Bihar and West Bengal. And you'd think, after 20 years, this would be a chance for a major modernization effort, right? Using India's digital strengths. But the irony, as highlighted in this source, is quite glaring. Despite India being a global leader in digital infrastructure, think Aadhaar, the whole Digital India push the framework for this SRR 2025 was apparently rooted in really outdated paper-era procedures from the early 2000s.
Paper era. How so?
It required submitting up to 11 different documents, most of which were not digitally verifiable. So we have this incredible digital capacity for a potential trust revolution in voter rolls, but the process itself relied heavily on manual verification of paper.
And the biggest digital tool, Aadhaar, was it used?
That seems to be the major failure pointed out. Critically, the process excluded Aadhaar, India's most widespread, biometrically backed, and legally validated digital ID was apparently not integrated into this crucial verification process.
Why would they exclude Aadhaar? That seems counterintuitive.
The source suggests this exclusion created huge bureaucratic bottlenecks. It made verification incredibly cumbersome for officials. And crucially, it meant failing to utilize Aadhaar's potential power to instantly eliminate duplicate voters and automatically update records based on, say, changes of address.
So instead of streamlining, it became more complex.
It devolved into a cumbersome, bureaucratic exercise, requiring officials to manually sift through stacks of paper documents, a missed opportunity for efficiency and accuracy.
And what were the results? Did this manual, paper-based process work well, despite the inefficiency? Particularly in Bihar, which was one of the first states.
The results in Bihar, as detailed in the source, show the consequences of this institutional inertia, perhaps. The resulting electoral roll revealed really significant, almost statistically absurd anomalies.
Like what?
Well, for example, 3.66 lakh names were deleted, reportedly without clear communication to the voters. You had instances of centenarians, people over 100, being listed as new voters.
New voters at 100 plus.
Exactly, and perhaps most strikingly, a statistically implausible decline in the gender ratio on the electoral rolls. It dropped from 934 women per 1,000 men down to 892. These kinds of inconsistencies just scream manual error and potentially unverified, maybe even arbitrary, revisions.
What's fascinating, or maybe frustrating, is that the tech exists to prevent this, right? The ECINet database.
Absolutely. ECINet is one of the world's largest voter databases managed by CDAS. It apparently has the technical architecture, the capability to instantly detect and flag these kinds of anomalies using system-level analytics. It could spot duplicate entries, impossible age entries, sudden demographic shifts.
So why wasn't it used effectively?
That's the core puzzle, or tragedy as the source puts it. You have this incredibly powerful database, like a supercomputer capable of trapping every voter, but institutional inertia, or perhaps a reluctance to embrace tech-based transparency, means it's treated more like a glorified digital filing cabinet.
So the call is for a fundamental shift.
Yes. The mandate, the source concludes, is clear. The SOIR needs to transition from being this ritualistic manual process into a genuine trust revolution powered by software-driven verification, real-time analytics, and clear accountability.
Okay, let's pivot now. From the mechanics of governance and accountability to demographics and population policy. There's been a big headline recently from the UN Population Fund's State of World Population 2025 report. It shows India's total fertility rate, the TFR, has dropped to 1.9.
Yes, 1.9 children per woman, which is technically below the replacement level of about 2.1. It's a huge headline number, definitely grabbing attention.
Sub-replacement fertility, that sounds significant.
It is potentially very significant, but this opinion piece we looked at urges considerable caution on how we interpret that 1.9 figure. TFR is often misunderstood.
Misunderstood how? Isn't it just the average number of kids a woman has?
That's the common assumption, but no. TFR is actually a purely statistical measure. It uses something called the synthetic cohort assumption. It's a hypothetical calculation.
Okay, synthetic cohort assumption. Can you break that down for us, make it a bit simpler?
Sure. Essentially, TFR calculates the average number of children a woman would have if she lived her entire reproductive life, typically ages 15 to 49, and experienced today's fertility rates for each specific age group. Those are the age-specific fertility rates, or ASFRs, throughout that whole period.
So it's a snapshot of today's rates projected onto a hypothetical woman.
Exactly. And crucially, it makes a big assumption that today's younger women, as they age, will follow the exact same fertility patterns as today's older women. In a society undergoing rapid change like rising education, urbanization, career focus for women, that assumption is often false.
Right, younger generations might behave differently, and this connects to something called the tempo effect.
Precisely. This is where it gets really important for understanding that 1.9 number. The tempo effect highlights that TFR is highly sensitive to changes in the timing of when women have children.
The timing, not just the total number.
Yes. Think about it. If more women today are delaying having their first child or spacing out births more, maybe due to getting more education or focusing on careers first, those births are essentially postponed.
Okay.
Those postponed births are missed in the current year's calculation of TFR. They haven't happened yet. This artificially pushes the TFR figure downwards, making it look like women are having fewer children overall, when maybe they're just having them later in life.
So the dip to 1.9 could partly be a statistical illusion caused by delayed childbirth, rather than a definite choice for much smaller families overall.
It could be, yes. That's the core limitation of TFR that this piece emphasizes. We need to look deeper at the actual age-specific fertility rates, ASFRs, see if this postponement pattern holds true.
And do the ASFR trends confirm this delay?
They seem to, largely. The source mentions that in urban areas, you see a clear trend. Fertility rates are down among the youngest age groups, like 15-24, but they've actually increased in the older cohorts, 25-49. That strongly suggests women are indeed postponing childbirth, not necessarily foregoing it altogether.
What about rural areas? Is it the same pattern?
It's slightly different in rural areas, according to the analysis. While there's also postponement happening in the middle age groups, there's also a decline in fertility among the older rural cohorts, say 35, 39 and above. This might suggest a genuine reduction in the desired family size in those specific rural groups alongside the postponement effect.
Interesting. There's also another point about TFR limitations exclusions.
Yes, TFR calculations typically exclude births to women younger than 15 and older than 49. While that might be a reasonable assumption in some developed countries, the article argues it's less valid in developing countries where, unfortunately, early marriages still occur, and births to underage girls might sometimes be concealed from official statistics.
So considering all these potential flaws and nuances in the TFR number, what's the policy takeaway according to this opinion piece? Should India be panicking about the 1.9 figure?
The conclusion is pretty clear. Calls to panic and implement policies aimed at raising the TFR, based solely on this potentially flawed 1.9 figure, are premature and possibly misguided.
Why misguided?
Because historically, achieving sub-replacement fertility hasn't really constrained economic progress in many developed nations. Look at South Korea, Japan, many European countries. And more importantly, the piece argues India faces much more immediate and pressing challenges right now.
Such as?
Persistent high rates of youth unemployment, that's a huge demographic challenge. And also the need to prepare for and care for the existing and growing aging population. These are massive societal issues that need focus, regardless of whether the TFR today is technically 1.9 or 2.1.
That makes sense.
Focus.
On the known challenges. Okay, let's shift gears completely now. From human populations to our primate cousins and maybe their drinking habits, we're diving into the drunken monkey hypothesis. Sounds fun.
It's a really fascinating area of evolutionary biology. The hypothesis, in simple terms, suggests that our human preference for alcohol might not be a modern quirk, but might actually stem from deep evolutionary roots.
How so?
The idea is that our primate ancestors naturally encountered and consumed ethanol alcohol, which forms in ripe and overripe fruit when yeast ferments the sugars. Our bodies might have then evolved to process this ethanol efficiently, maybe even developing a preference for it because it signaled energy-rich food.
Okay, so it's a theory. Has anyone actually tested this? Like, observed primates getting alcohol from fruit in the wild?
Yes. Researchers at UC Berkeley did exactly that. They conducted a study analyzing the fruits eaten by wild chimpanzees in Uganda and Côte d'Ivoire. Chimps are our closest living relatives, remember, sharing about 98.8% of our DNA.
And what did they find in those fruits the chimps were eating? Was there actually alcohol?
They confirmed it. The ripe fruits contain small but measurable amounts of ethanol naturally formed by yeast fermentation. Now, a single fruit doesn't have much alcohol.
But chimps eat a lot of fruit.
Right. A lot. Up to 4.5 kilograms of fruit daily. That can be 5 to 10% of their entire body weight. So even those tiny concentrations of ethanol in each fruit really added up over the course of a day. They ended up consuming a substantial dosage, as the study puts it.
How substantial are we talking? Could a chimp actually get, a bit tipsy from eating fruit all day?
Well, the calculations suggest their average daily intake amounted to roughly 14 grams of pure ethanol.
14 grams? How much is that in, human terms?
That's equivalent to about one standard American drink, like a can of beer or a glass of wine. But here's the interesting part. When you adjust for the chimpanzee's smaller average body mass, which is typically less than 40 kilograms...
It hits them harder.
Proportionally, yes. That 14 grams is closer to the effect of nearly 2 standard drinks per day for a chimp.
Wow, 2 drinks a day just from fruit. Did they show any signs of being intoxicated? Stumbling around the jungle?
Apparently not. The researchers observed no signs of intoxication. The likely reason is that they spread this consumption out throughout the entire day, eating fruit constantly. This probably prevented any rapid spikes in their blood alcohol levels.
Okay. Did they seem to prefer the fruits with more alcohol?
They definitely showed a strong preference for certain fruits, like these sticky figs called Ficus mucuso. The study found that eating just 75 of these figs alone could contain about 10 grams of alcohol, so they were definitely getting a decent dose from their preferred foods.
And this dietary finding, it lines up with genetic evidence about alcohol tolerance, doesn't it?
Beautifully, yes. Independent genetic research has shown that about 10 million years ago, way back in our shared ancestry, the last common ancestor of African apes, like chimps and gorillas, and modern humans experienced a really significant genetic mutation.
What did this mutation do?
It dramatically increased the efficiency of an enzyme called ADH4, which is crucial for metabolizing ethanol. The mutation boosted its effectiveness by something like 40-fold.
40 times better at processing alcohol.
Exactly. This suggests that our distant ancestors were encountering enough alcohol in their diet, probably from fermented fruit, for there to be strong evolutionary pressure favoring individuals who could process it better. It suggests this attraction to and tolerance for ethanol predates modern humans by millions of years.
Okay, so the chimps eat fruit with alcohol. They can process it, maybe even prefer it. But it leaves that big question hanging, right? Why do they like it?
That's the open question precisely. Is the chimpanzee actively seeking out the alcohol itself, maybe for its psychoactive effects or some other benefit? Or is the alcohol simply acting as a reliable cue for ripeness?
A cue, like a signal.
Yes, a signal. As proposed by Dr. Robert Dudley, the originator of the drunken monkey hypothesis, the smell or taste of ethanol might just signal to the chimp that this fruit is perfectly ripe, packed with extra calories, maybe has an enhanced taste. The alcohol itself might be secondary to the nutritional information it conveys.
So seeking the boost or the buzz.
Yeah.
Still don't know for sure.
We don't know for sure with chimps, but the finding is really significant. It confirms that our primate lineage was definitely ingesting and metabolizing substantial amounts of alcohol long before humans ever figured out how to brew beer or distill spirits. It's wired into our history.
Fascinating stuff.
Okay.
Let's wrap up our deep dive today by shifting focus again, this time to global economics and what sounds like a major supply chain crisis brewing. China's control over rare earth minerals. Automakers seem to be in a real panic.
Yeah, the situation described in these sources sounds pretty critical, maybe even existential for the global auto industry,
Right.
especially for the big transition to electric vehicles, EVs.
Why EVs in particular?
Because rare earth elements, things like ytterbium, holmium, europium, are absolutely essential components in high-performance EV motors. They're also used in lots of other car parts like mirrors, sensors, pumps. And China has an almost unbelievable grip on the supply chain.
How much control are we talking about?
The numbers are staggering. China controls about 70% of the actual mining of rare earths globally, but that's just the start. They control 85% of the refining process, which is complex, and crucially, 90% of the production of the high-strength rare earth magnets needed for those EV motors.
90% of magnets.
And for the specific heavy rare earths, which are even more critical for some advanced motors, China controls 99.8% of the global refining capacity. Alternatives are practically negligible right now.
That's not just a monopoly. That sounds like a total chokehold. And Beijing has tightened the screws now with export controls.
That's the immediate threat causing the panic. China announced new, expanded export controls on these critical minerals back in October, set to take effect on November 8th. And this comes after previous restrictions had already depleted existing stockpiles outside China.
So companies are scrambling.
Desperately. The sources quote auto executives warning that the entire industry could potentially be shut down in 2 months if supplies are cut off. Orders for these materials apparently surged immediately after the new controls were announced. Companies are trying to overstock before the deadline hits.
What can they even do long term? Are there mitigation strategies? Can they design motors without these rare earths?
That's the big long-term push. Companies like GM, BMW, Renault, and major suppliers are heavily investing in developing new motor designs that use significantly fewer rare earths, or even none at all, so-called low to zero rare earth content motors.
Is that feasible?
There's definitely progress. The article mentions an AI deep tech firm called Monumo that apparently used its technology to help clients achieve an average 24% reduction in rare earth content in their motor designs. So innovation is happening.
But innovation takes time. What about finding alternative sources, mining outside China, like that U.S.-Australia Critical Minerals Pact we heard about?
Yes, that pact is a major geopolitical move aimed directly at this problem. The U.S. and Australia committed a combined $3 billion to try and kickstart mining and processing projects outside China. They even talked about setting a price floor for these critical minerals to encourage investment.
$3 billion. That sounds substantial. Can that build a new supply chain quickly? President Trump apparently claimed they'd have massive supply within a year.
That claim met with considerable skepticism from global mining experts quoted in the sources. They basically said achieving project readiness, even getting mines operational and refining capacity build, even by 2027 would be heroic and unachievable for many projects.
Not 1 year then. More like.
Realistically, significant new supply growth is probably 5 to 7 years away, maybe longer, not 12 months. The refining process, in particular, is technically very difficult and carries significant environmental challenges. It's not something you can just switch on overnight.
So in the short to medium term, China's grip, that 90% control of refining, 98% of magnet manufacturing, remains pretty much unshakable.
That seems to be the reality, which gives China immense pricing power and strategic leverage.
And that must make it risky for Western companies to invest billions in alternatives, right? If China can just flood the market.
That's identified as the ultimate barrier. Developing alternative mines outside China, developing those rare earth-free motors, these are inherently expensive, risky, long-term investments. Industry experts warn that China can easily undermine all that effort simply by keeping the prices of its own rare earths artificially low.
Making the non-Chinese options financially unviable before they even get going.
Exactly. It's a huge deterrent to investment. Why spend billions building a mine if China can just slash prices and make your project unprofitable overnight? That's why government support, like that price floor mentioned in the U.S.-Australia Pact, is seen as crucial. Western developers need some guarantee of a higher price to justify the cost and risk.
So even if the actual minerals are years away, does that U.S.-Australia Pact have any immediate impact?
It definitely does financially. The immediate beneficiaries are the Australian mining companies aiming to develop these projects. The article highlights that the U.S. Export-Import Bank, EXIM, quickly issued over $2.2 billion in letters of interest to specific companies, like Arafura Rare Earths.
Letters of interest, what does that mean?
It's basically a strong signal of potential future financing. It dramatically increases the investment allure of these projects right now. It makes it easier for them to raise private capital. So even if the metal itself won't hit the market for years, the pact immediately injects confidence and capital into building that alternative supply chain. It's a clear geopolitical signal that the West is serious about trying to break this dependency, even if it's going to be expensive and take a long time.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.